So just gonna press record. Yeah, so thank you both for those intros. Really, really helpful to kind of set up what we're gonna kind of delve into a bit more today. And yeah, I'm gonna fling it back to yourself, Rowan. And yeah, because you kind of already touched on it, so we may as well draw it back in whilst it's still fresh in everyone's mind. So yeah, two things. So yeah, you're at our 2024 Neighbourhood Watch conference, and you did a presentation on solution-focused policing. And yeah, as you quoted today, and as you quoted at the conference, you said that the police are the public, and the public are the police. So yeah, please tell us a little bit more about the history behind this statement, and also how it still remains relevant today, if it does.
Okay. Um, in fact, it wasn't relevant. It was less relevant when it actually was originally established. The term the police of the public, popular police. It's one of the nine principles of policing that were established in 1829 with the establishment of the Metropolitan Police, which is called the first modern British police service. Not quite true. The first modern British police service was in Glasgow, Scotland, um, 30 years before Sir Robert Peel actually established the Metropolitan Police. So, but where's the term come from? It comes from the reality that Britain, if you have to do a bit of a step back into 1830 and 1829, what had happened previously. So you'd had the Napoleonic Wars and all that period. Europe and the historians in the room will all be aware. Europe had been basically in turmoil for probably like 50 odd years, 40, 50 years. Um, Britain had been slightly isolated from this, but with the growth of the Industrial Revolution, there was a need to actually establish a police service, because people moving into the urban areas from rural areas, over congestion, all the causes that, all the demographic horrors that create crime, etc., were growing, and so a police service was required. But the first thing everyone wanted, they wanted to make sure that the police service only policed certain people. In other words, not the aristocracy, not the landed gentry. And so the tenets of policing don't come from a particularly good place. So the protection of life and property, which all of you would be aware of, really was the protection of the lives of the people who own the property. Nothing more noble than that. In fact, that's not very noble. And so that was the birth of policing. But if you look back then at the principles of policing, they are very, very relevant today. Public is in all of the nine principles. And the work that I'm doing, I came actually from a community engagement background when I was working at the College of Policing at Bramshill, just south of Reading. And I used to be on the Race Equality Council in Reading and a few other things. And the vital thing about policing today, it's lost, if it ever had, that community engagement. And it's vitally important that in a more globalized world, that actually the police are seen as the people to go to when people are in trouble, etc. And they don't live in fear of policing, as some people and many communities do to this very day. So it's even more important that the police are the public are the police. That's not the case at this moment, since the Sarah Everard case, the Sarah Everard murder. Confidence in policing has literally gone through the floor. So whereas historically it was certain communities who had issues with policing, it's across the spectrum now. And so there's an awful lot of confidence rebuilding that needs to be done. And actually the work Ho's doing is absolutely vital in that process. And it's important that yourselves become far more influencers of policing, because they are meant to be servants of yourselves. or ourselves. I am no longer a police officer.
No, that's really, really interesting. I think it ties in for me to your next question. I'm going to hold it in on you and then come
Yep.
back to yourselves, Hoka. Just because I think there's something interesting you're saying about the current state of today. So yeah, my next question was all about the current state of crime in the UK and how you feel about it, particularly in relation to the most recent kind of crime and policing bill that the Labour government have put forward. Like, do you think we're heading in the right direction towards, better kind of national community safety? I know there's a few kind of politics fans in here, so it'd be really good to hear your opinion, and I'm sure there'll be questions about it afterwards. But yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. Um, well, of course, the Tories, the previous government, the Conservative government, actually introduced the a new policing bill. Labour have taken it on, carried on with it. So I'm totally and utterly in support of greater neighbourhood policing and a return to neighbourhood policing. There was actually a period between 2000 and around 2005 when neighbourhood policing really was doing rather well and growing. And then the focus of policing swung completely towards counter-terrorism. And rather than working with communities, police agencies or police services withdrew from communities and actually only started focusing in on specific communities. So there's been a withdrawal of community policing. So I'm absolutely in favour of that return and that the pledge of a guarantee when politicians, and I do politics as well, when politicians can't pledge anything, circumstances change. I very much hope the public keep them to that. Um, Violent crime, yes, it certainly needs to come down. Remember, it's not as high as people may think. The fear of crime is a lot higher than the reality. Um, Overall, though, I'm far more in line with tackling the causes of deviance, crime, etc., rather than having to use a sticking plaster after the event. Um, Unfortunately, politicians, senior police officers don't get promoted on what didn't happen. And we've got to change that thinking. And that's why I'm working on the solution oriented practice for policing and other agencies, because it adds that hope. And it's all about, and Ho and people like Ho are absolutely vital in this, because it's about engaging with communities and truly finding out what communities want rather than what the police service or other agencies think they want. And I'm sure Ho does that very much for Reading University as well. It's not simply what the university wants, it's what the community want of the university.
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of discussions in the youth council alone talking about how much there needs to be more early intervention
Yeah,
rather than just looking at the treatment when things do happen and then being very reactionary. So there's a lot, I think, that some of young people here can speak to that, and especially in terms of the projects that they're working on individually, tackling kind of different issues. Across the board, all of their projects are looking at an early intervention approach. So clearly,
yeah,
it's very much needed. But yeah, that's really interesting about that, the kind of concept of policing right now and where hopefully it will lead. But yes, I'm gonna move on to Hokit now. And yes, from your experience and understanding Hokit, what are the most troubling crime and safety issues in Reading, and how are they, if they are, being addressed by local authorities at the moment?
Think as a bit of context, I live in London. I've lived in London my whole life. My perception of crime is quite high in a way. Sort of where I live, it's safe and it's not as bad as other parts of London, but compared to Reading, it's definitely a lot higher. But since I've started working, I've realised that in Reading, violence against women and girls is a really big issue, and it isn't really talked enough about in the university and in the wider community. And it's just it's an issue that gets bigger every day when I talk about it. Um, Thames Valley Police are quite good. They have got their Project Vigilant, which is looking at tackling these issues and what Ruwan's talked about, looking at those root causes, which is really good. And they've recently done a project around conversations, which sort of takes it back to step one, and really educates young people who are on that borderline of getting to the age of 18 what it's about. And that's been really positive to see, because when I was a student a few years ago, this conversation wasn't really there. So it is developing. I think for us at the university, it's really difficult because a lot of students are not confident in reporting. They don't know what the consequences in a way are. But we need to reiterate that there aren't consequences for them, it's consequences for the people who go and commit these sort of awful crimes. And it's just reiterating that they can trust us. And it's difficult because, as Ruwan says, young people have that perception, and I guess all people have that perception, and we're trying our best to do that. Um, I think that's our sort of most troubling crimes. There are a few other little bits. Sort of, we have a lot of bike crime on our campus, which isn't great. But our security team have been doing quite a lot. And the other day they did catch two bike thieves in 40 minutes, which is actually quite good for them. But it's something that they don't communicate that with the police as much. So we're trying to sort of build upon that, and have better connections with the police so that they know what's happening on our campus and we know what's happening in the town centre. Um, and I do think, sort of aside from issues of crime and safety, a lot of organisations in Reading are disconnected from each other. And I'll talk a lot about it later, but that connection, and the sharing of information is really important, especially with crimes. So I'm part of the Safer Student Partnership, and I would only know those like big issues of crimes if I was on that sort of group. If I wasn't on that group, I wouldn't know, and finding that information is really difficult. So it is it is a battle that we have at the moment. But I always like to reiterate that all crimes are bad. There's no um, sort of saying this one's worse than the other ones. We don't want crime at the end of the day, especially around the university and to our students. So yeah, we try our best to work with different partners and organizations.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like key words that are coming up already from this conversation are community and connection and trust. I know that we're obviously doing a project which is with University of Reading students, and literally focusing on essentially building that trust and giving young people the space to have their voices heard when it comes to decision making around kind of crime and safety. So yeah, based on what we've actually looked at, I guess, together so far, like, yeah, what do you think's been your personal, like, biggest takeaways or learnings about youth safety?
I think there's a lot of things, and it's really difficult to summarize. The trust and confidence is really a big thing. Young people, our students, some of our local residents, they don't really believe in the police. Only a few weeks ago, there was a sexual assault, and the police did take quite a long time to respond to the student. And that sort of is a bit heartbreaking for us. And we've had these experiences on our youth action group that the students will report something, but they don't hear anything back. and that really, to me, tells me that we need to do better in providing that space for students to be heard and to feel comfortable when they talk about experiences. Um, but also, we need sort of better messaging. I've just been in a little webinar about how young people prefer to be sort of not in a way taught, but how information gets to them, and sort of the old ways, which I say old, it's not really old, but it's the traditional methods of doing things aren't suitable. But it's a balance, I think. The students that we talk to, some of them prefer the more traditional ways. So some would like to see sort of messaging across the town centre, and some would prefer to see things on social media. So it's really hearing all these different ideas about what we could do better in a way. Um, yeah, I think well-being and safety is another one as well. It's really that part of that confidence. The mental well-being is really important now, and we don't want to neglect that. And that should be part of those experiences, and that should be part of crime and safety, because that's sort of the fallout if you have a horrible experience. Um, so yeah, there's quite a few things I could sort of talk on for, but those I think are my three key ones.
That's really helpful, Hoka. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna turn back to yourself, Rowan, just for your final question. And then we've got one more question for Hoka, and then we'll have time for discussion. But yeah, Rowan, within the Youth Council, there's been kind of like, yeah, there's been a mutual acknowledgement that there's, little to no crime prevention and personal safety education for young people in particular. Yeah, do you have any kind of general personal safety advice, or kind of words of wisdom on how young people can keep themselves safe on the streets today from crime?
Okay, I've got to be careful with the answer because the reality is that crime is not as high as some people may think. So what I don't want to do is then load in a fear factor that shouldn't be there. Um, Crime obviously does exist. I mean, I know Reading very well. Someone I was mentoring actually was stabbed, was murdered actually in Reading a few years ago, in the city centre. At my own university, University of East London, going back to Coronation Day, one of my lecturer's sons was out. Um, well, he was stabbed. The police didn't turn up. This is in the East End of London. They didn't turn up because they were too busy at the coronation. They eventually came along to the hospital, but that was because they thought he was going to die. He came close to dying. Um, so, and obviously, because of the work I do, I meet lots of victims of crime. But then I have to go back to and go, actually, this is still a very small percentage. So what do we do? It's about being aware. In fact, I note, because I'm trolling her at this moment, I note from his LinkedIn, he did human geography, which includes actually GIS mapping, demographic mapping, etc. And those sorts of things are really useful to know. So it's useful that people understand what are the crime trends in their area or an area they're going to go to. That's really, really useful. Um, because then you can actually start thinking about what not to do, etc. I mean, certain parts of London, is it sensible? I mean, I don't. Uh, some people are no longer wearing expensive watches, etc. Those sorts of things. E-bikes are very much on the up for being stolen because they're very resellable very easily. Mobile phones are still, as Ho will be aware, crimes against students go up So what happens is new students arrive about a month into their course. They will suffer, some of them will suffer from a theft, and then 2 months later, they'll be re-victimized because the offenders know the insurance claims come out and they've just bought a new laptop again. So it's about being very aware of things. University campuses are not the safest places. You don't know who everyone is, and equally, you don't want to lock it down so everyone's carrying a card, etc., etc., because the university life is something all young people should go through. Or not all should do, but if they go, they should enjoy it. It's not meant to be a prison. Um, so it's about being aware. So I'm not going to come out with you should do things such as self-defense, training, etc. It's about being just aware of things and avoiding places. So East End of London, or even in Reading, actually, at night there would be parts of Reading, certainly parts of East End of London. I wouldn't walk through the park. Um, Now, the council, what they should be doing is putting lighting all the way through. Because the way to get rid of criminals out of an area is actually make them safe for people. So this is why I'm turning it around. I want yourselves to be influencing councils, police agencies, etc., to actually start the design out crime practices again. So we actually, just by having people around, discourages crime. Not sure I've completely answered your question, but I've got
No,
a
I
part.
think it's good. I think it's good to flip it around. I mean, the main point of why we started the youth council was very much to provide a space for building upon, yeah, that influence, that participation in, safety decision making and crime prevention decision making. So it's exactly why we started this and why I'm even here, why
Yeah,
I'm being funded by the National Lottery. So it's definitely important, and that's what we keep wanting to build on is that awareness, and that's what I want to be able to grow with this youth council. Also beyond that as well, when we have
yeah,
our new strategy that will come out eventually, because that's what we're working on at the moment. So very much feeding that into our new outcomes and impacts for the next 5 years when we do our next 5 year strategy, which we're starting now actually. So yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, I'm gonna just switch over to Hokit for the last question, and then we will head over into Q&A because I can see that people are having questions in mind as we're speaking. So yeah, Hokit, final question. As a young person yourself, and also a community worker, what do you think needs to be done to make neighborhoods safer, better places to live, and especially for young people?
My top my favorite word is co-creation. A lot of people will know that, but that's what we need. We need better collaboration between organizations. I think as a student, I knew and now working in the community, I know that there are too many campaigns with the same message targeting the same issues by different organizations that simply don't line up. And if everyone worked together, I think the messaging could be better. It could be more consistent. So, if anyone's living in London, and you know that Transport for London and the British Transport Police have their messaging around sexual harassment, and a lot of students have said to me that's quite good because you see it everywhere and it's consistent, and that's what we need. My second one is we need a lot more young people in advisory panels and at sort of top level decision making because um, there are not enough young people. I'm going to be careful. There are not enough young people at that level, and a lot of their perspectives and their experiences are very different to those who are already on that panel. So sort of advocating that you should be there on those panels and I think that is sort of the best thing you could do as a young person because you're representing so many other young people who might not know or might not have the opportunity, but you can help sort of develop that. And then I think for the third one, my third little point is we might need more funding. And I know everyone asks for more funding, but having more funding to engage young people, I think as a young person myself, I spent 6 years, well, almost 6 years, coming to 6 years, on Transport for London's youth panel. And for the last five, I've been doing it voluntary because it's something I love. But at the same time, there are sort of issues around crime and safety which are a lot more serious. And young people need to sort of have, in a way, sort of some compensation to provide those experiences, but also the funding that allows them to deliver a project that is sort of at the heart to them. Um, and yeah, and they need to feel acknowledged at the end of the day. So, as young people, you can do it. It takes a little bit of time, but if you keep advocating, and you keep sort of pestering those MPs or whoever you want to talk to, you can get there at the end of the day. Yeah.
I love that. Great motivational piece to end off the panel on. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been really insightful to have your thoughts and opinions around what's currently going on with safety and crime prevention. I am now going to hand over to our, where is it? Let me just get my screen. Yes, I'm now going to hand over for our Q&A. I will pause the